and share. Sarah's the enterprise architect and a technology executive at Avondale here in town, and so we're honored to have you. Thanks for sharing.
All right. I don't know if anyone needs a break or just people are free to get up because I know we've been here since 9 o'clock. But first, I'd like to start by saying, who I am, and then we can get on going. So my name is Sarah Andres. I've been in Jacksonville since my husband and I moved here since 94. And we've been married 28 years, and he's back there. He doesn't want to come up. He's my number one cheerleader. He really is. My husband doesn't let me, bring myself down, and I think that's why I'm here where I am, because of him. And I wanted to say that. And also my son's back there, Cole. I love you. All right, so I wanted to say that. So as Blake said, so I'm in technology. I'm a software architect. And throughout my career, women in tech is basically, there's not a lot of us in the field. I mean, there's a lot of us, but in comparison to men, not too much, not too many. And in fact, my memory has always been usually the only woman in the room. There's always probably one or two people in there with me, even in my classroom when I went to the university, in Rutgers University. Yay. And I thought things have changed, right? That was probably in the 90s. I don't want to date myself, but it was back then. And even now when I talk to the girls in my company who's software developers, they said, oh yeah, it hasn't really changed. There's only usually 1, 2, 3, maybe even, not even 10%. In our company, there's probably about 12% girls. About 100 developers, let's say, there's probably about 10 of us, or 12. So we're under the norm in the sense that overall, there's really 18% of women in technology. Now, why am I talking about women and men? So when Paul asked me to speak today, he's asked me before, to be honest, and I always said no. And Paul is like a father to my husband and I, and for me to say no, it's kind of like, Paul, I don't have anything to say. But this year, when he came up to me, I knew it was time. And it's just one of those where I can't say no anymore. So I've been praying to the Lord to give me a message. And so the Lord wanted me to speak about women and men in business. So first of all, I'm not a feminist, and I'm not anti-men. I'm pro-women, but I'm not anti-men. And I'll explain that. And I think it's critical this message goes out, because I think if we find who we are in Christ, men will find their roles, women will find their role, and will be complete, right? Fulfilling God's plan in this world. That's what I'm going to talk about. So next slide. So let me start first. I titled it Diversity God's Way, and I wanted to explain what diversity is. And I don't know if you hear this word, but it's a buzzword. You hear it every time, at least in my circles. And now that I'm in talking about this, it's real apparent. So diversity is understanding, accepting, and valuing differences between people. Okay, so we are all different, right? I'm focusing on men and women, but if you look at the definition, diversity could mean ethnicity, right? And if you guys want to know, I'm actually a Filipino, by birth. I'm an American citizen. I went to this country when I was 17 and to study here, really. So there's that aspect of ethnicity, there's an aspect of age, right? And nowadays there's sexual preference, right? So diversity is used for a lot of things, but I'm going to focus on men and women. So next slide. And then there's inclusion. So another buzzword, diversity and inclusion. So inclusion is an environment where people of diverse backgrounds can come together, collaborate, be supportive, respect one another, right? And then we now have D&I, or the acronym for diversity and inclusion, is basically a company strategy to support diversity in the workplace to bring a competitive business advantage. So suddenly, profit came in the picture, money making when it comes to diversity. And why is that? So next slide, please. So I've been researching this, and I found this study that talked about how companies that are gender diverse are more likely to perform 15% better. And if you're ethnically diverse, you're more likely to perform 35% better. So there's something about, I think intuitively, we know that there's something good about different people working together, men and women. Because if you have different points of view, it brings a little more color. You can solve problems better. I mean, it's just, doesn't it make sense? So next slide. And diversity is a global matter. So when you diversify your workforce, studies now even say a nation can actually earn more, up to $12 trillion, says up there, or 11% of their annual gross domestic product. And globally, it could increase by 26%, which is $26 trillion. So women in business seems to matter, right? But what I'm gonna go through now is before, women are not even allowed to speak. The fact that I'm speaking right now, in some countries, they're not allowed to. And there are even some churches here in the US where women are not allowed to speak. And I'll talk more about that too. Next slide, please. Oh, the one before that. So this just came out from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So just going into 2020, women are now over 50% of the workforce. We occupy 50-point-something% of American jobs. They exclude, of course, farm workers, because there are male-dominated industries, but everything other than that, we're half the workforce. Okay, women are half the workforce. Next slide. Even though there's more of us working, we still face a lot of challenges. If you click that, we may be employed, but most women are in low-paying jobs. What does that mean? Most of the time, women stay in entry-level positions because, and if you click again, we're usually not in leadership positions. And why is that? Well, for the most part, usually if you have men in the top, it's harder for women to come to the top. I've noticed that in my company too. I'm now a director of product architecture and availability, but I've always been an individual contributor, which means I don't manage people. I've been consulting since I started. I even had my own business. I had software developers in the Philippines, and back then it was huge to have outsourcing. But I think we tend to be, I tend to work with people, but I don't manage them. I don't go over them, like what Bill was saying earlier. So what's happening is it's hard for women to take the first step up. They don't go into management positions easily. Okay, so let's go here. So There are more women in C-suite positions recently, so there's been some improvements. What's a C-suite position? Basically, chief officers like what Bill is. There's, in the past year, I don't know if you look at headlines, but there's a CEO of, some companies now a woman, or CMO. They really make a big deal out of it. So somehow there's improvement in that area. But in the lower jobs, women are still underrepresented. And why is that? Okay, so I was saying the first step up to management is difficult, resulting in more women stuck in entry-level positions, and fewer women basically are not leaders today. So let me ask this question. Is there really a problem? So why am I talking about this, right? So here, when speaking about this slide, as I said, I just became director recently, but I had a boss, and I went under him around 2016, so he was my boss. And one thing about him, I knew God put me under him. I had a dream before, he came to the company. It was kind of strange, like even his name, I kind of saw that. And so when I went under him, I said, okay, good, this is a God thing, right? You know when you're in a good place, when God is speaking to you about something. So I knew I was under him for a reason. And I was in a group of architects. Of course, I'm the only woman, and it's always been like that, so I don't even think about it anymore. And one day I walked in, and he fired everyone except me, right? Now, I'm not saying I'm good. It just shocked me, but somehow he saw something, and he's a good guy, because I knew, my dream, I had him, he was wearing a white shirt, and he was pure, and I just knew he has a good intent. And I was in a room on a second floor, in our old building there, and I was locked away in a room, and I was just working, doing the right thing. One thing is, if you do the right thing, God will reward it, right? So I somehow, even when things are hard, you just heads down, do what God wants you to do, and that's what I did. And he told me to come up to his office, and he said, Sarah, I'm gonna move you in an office across from me. I said, are you sure? He's not the CEO, but he sits right next to the CEO, and the CEO has an admin assistant, and he wanted me to sit in front of his office. So it's almost like the CEO, him, the admin assistant, and me. And I said, I don't know, I think I was even like, I don't think people would like it. I was more worried about what people are thinking. He's like, well, let them not like it. Let's see how this goes. I want you to work on certain things for me. So I started solving problems for him. And even then, that move to that office, the Lord shows me dreams. And I had that admin assistant, the CEO, preparing an office for me, right? So, and in my dream, I saw him, he said, Sarah, this is your office, and it was beautiful. And I said, okay. And sure enough, that invitation came, and I said, okay, this is God again. All right, so I'm not too worried. So my point is, he sponsored me, right? He was the one who took me from where I am to, from where I am to where I am today, but even more. But there are men that can help you, or has helped me in my career. That's why I said it's not about women and men and all that. It's just that there are reasons for why you work, where you work, and who you work with, like Bill was saying. It's important. So the question is there really a problem? So are men and women, next slide, are men and women in an understanding, accepting environment where differences are valued? Are women in a collaborative, supportive, and respectful environment? And are men and women given equal opportunities in the workplace? So put these questions in the back of your mind, because eventually I think I want to answer these questions, or you may have to answer it yourself, depending on where you work or what you do in your place of business. So what did God say? So now let's go here. Let's read this. So Genesis 1, verse 26 to 28. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it." Next slide. So that verse tells you that the Lord's plan has always been for men and women are meant to be side by side to take dominion. We are equal inheritors of God's image. So there's not one above the other. We're equal. And together, we make God's image. And together, we manifest his likeness in the world. Okay? But what happened? Instead, we took control. So sin came, right? The enemy deceived Eve. Adam willfully disobeyed. And then their relationship and the earth was cursed. And so our fellowship with God was broken. Their right to take dominion was lost, and the ability of male and female to stand together against a common enemy was lost. So women got devalued. Women lost their value, can't do more than to serve and follow men. And women agreed they're responsible for the entrance of sin and have less value than men. And of course, the result is confusion. Now, women devalued, go back to that slide. I said earlier that this is for real. There are still some women who think this way, and there's still some men who lord it over the women that, you know, you're inferior. During a New Year's Eve party recently, my husband and I were in a family gathering to bring in 2020. And a guy came up to, well, he's kind of a relative, but he's dating this girl who's a cousin, right? And he comes in and he always like kind of stirs up certain things. And he sat with us and he said to me that he found a good church in Orange Park, somewhere here in Jacksonville. I said, "Oh, great, good." He's like, "I'm tired of big churches. I don't like these superstar pastors. I just want a small church." And I said, "Actually, that sounds really good. I think that's where we're heading at some point." Anyway, but I digress. And I said, "Oh, good. How did you find it?" He said, "Oh, a coworker told me about it. But, you know, this is something you may not like." And I said, "What?" "We don't allow the women to speak." And I said, "Oh, really?" And my husband's beside me watching the ball drop or something. It's New Year's Eve. And he was silent, but I know he's listening. I know he could hear us. I said, "Really?" He's like, "Oh, yeah. Didn't you see what the Bible said? Women, should be silent." And I said, "So are you telling me that if God spoke to me, right, I can't tell anyone?" He's like, "Yeah. Let's go read 1 Timothy 2. And I said, I said, okay, hold on. I know what 1 Timothy 2 says, but are you saying that God cannot speak to women too? Um, well, women get deceived easily. That's why we don't allow them to speak. I said, oh, yeah, remember the garden? And it said so, right? Eve got deceived. And I said to him, I shouldn't say his name, so I won't. I said, if the enemy can silence half of the Lord's army, he'll win. And he said to me, see, you're being emotional. So suddenly it's my problem. I'm being emotional, and honestly, I was getting upset. I was getting upset. You're getting emotional, and that's why, and I said, and when I'm getting mad, I usually just get up. I didn't want to get there. It's New Year's Eve. I don't want to start the new year mad, right? No. So I said, excuse me, I got up. And I was making some coffee, and I told myself, Lord, before the night ends, I need to let this go. Because I was still fuming, because he was just frustrating to me because I couldn't get him to see, right? And eventually, at the end of the night, my husband walked him over, and he said, sweet, you're not really mad, are you? And I'm thinking, no, I'm not mad, And so he gave, the other guy gave me a big hug, till our next family gathering. And then he said, by the way, all the disciples are men. And I said, and I said, okay. Haha, all right. God bless you, love you, blessings, blessings, blessings. So, okay, so in my mind, I'm like, oh my, it's still happening. I just never thought of it. In business, you never really think about these things. But because they normally, you're allowed to talk, you're a worker and all that, but there's some problems in other places. But let's see where it started. Okay, so next slide. So women got devalued, and to be honest, for centuries, women have been oppressed, right? And there are still women being oppressed in other nations, especially. So feminism came, and this is in the United States. There's several waves of them that came. They addressed legal, social, cultural, financial, and sexual issues. It first started well. They went for women's suffrage so women can vote in the early 1900s. Then they went into pro-choice, pro-life, equal pay. The other things are good, domestic violence, issues, sexual harassment, which still occurs. But then we're now, from what I've been reading, we're now into the next, there's several waves of the women's movement, and now we're into the Me Too movement, Time's Up, there's women's marches, etc. So here's what I think. The enemy, when the Lord created us in the garden, he had a purpose for us. But what God creates, what he constructs, the enemy deconstructs. He'll attack the very identity you have, what you're made for and what you're about, right? So feminism strives to make men and women the same. But we are equal. Remember I said earlier, we're equal inheritors of his image, but we're not the same. Men and women are different. My husband is very different from me, but in personality, but by role, we have gender roles. You can't make some mother what a mother does and what a father does, and we just have different roles. So with feminism, they made men and women the same, and by making us all the same, it negated the other gender. And so if you don't have the other gender, there's really no more equality. You don't need it, because everyone's the same, right? And then without equality, there really is no diversity. Because you're all the same. There's no more diverse. There's no more different backgrounds. So you can see how all messed up it is, how confusing it is. However, God redeems, right? So there's God's redemption and power of restoration, and God still wants male and female to display his likeness. So what is our true identity, men and women? I'm addressing both. Our identity comes from our submission to the Father. So only when you know who your Father is, then you know who you are, right? And until we have submitted to God, we cannot love, respect, or honor one another. Okay? So when Jesus came, next slide, and I want to, because I know Bill touched on empowerment, but as he said, the bad empowerment he's talking about is the empowerment based on ego. When you're submitted, you're low, you're humble, right? So when you're submitted to God, it's a different kind of empowerment that he gave. So when Jesus came, he freed women and men from oppression and bondage. He was the first, he led the first women's empowerment movement. He really did. So if we paid attention to what Jesus did way back, we probably wouldn't even have a mess we are today. And I had to put this verse because I just remember when that woman, she was like lost and being stoned. He said, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" Women, don't let them accuse you. Right? If Jesus is your Lord, he has given you the voice and the power that you need to walk in this earth in his way, right? So women got in the word, right? Approximately 60% of the leaders Paul mentions in his letters are women, and some of them are apostles, and some are in business. Okay, and there's a list of them here. And from there, right, centuries later, we had Joan of Arc. We even have Mother Teresa, Maria Woodworth Etter, Amy Semple McPherson, Catherine Coleman. And there's modern ones, right? There's Joyce Meyer, et cetera, et cetera. These women stepped up, defied convention, and followed the call of God on their lives. Their pioneering lives opened the door for all women to step back into the original plan that God had for them. So let's circle back now. So what's God's definition of diversity? So the Bible carefully guards gender as God defined it. And if we don't have an understanding of what a woman is, it leads to the wrong understanding of who men are. So, for example, at home, if there's no order in your home, I'm talking about husband and wives, your roles in your home, your household will probably not run really well. There probably won't be peace. There'll be other issues that come in. So this is very important. Now, I'm not going to go into homes. I only have a few more minutes, but what I'm saying is we are all defined by God, and we need to understand how we should walk and how we should submit to one another. When Larry asked us, "What's your purpose?" And I was with these guys talking, and I said, "My purpose is to be Christ-like." That's all us. And what's that again? It's God's image, how he created us from the beginning. So women are to be partners alongside men in making the world into a garden. So now we're back to the garden. We came from there, and we're going to go back to there. And that's our goal. So I'm ending with this. What is true diversity? It's together. Men and women are to take dominion, watch over and keep the garden, create and multiply and expand the kingdom. So to the men here and the women here, especially since we're in the business conference, let's talk about this. I just want to increase your awareness, especially men. I think there are some biases. We tend to stick together with, I'd rather we should really hang out with the women. Women, you have to be careful. You don't really hang out with men. It's just different. But what I'm saying is, we tend to promote like who's like us. If you're in positions of authority, look in your organization, especially the men here. Look in your organization, see, because there are women in your department that could bring completion to your goals. Together, men and women create. That's how God created us. So be aware, just open your eyes. Now, do not promote women because they're women. That's also wrong. That's not what I'm saying here. I forgot to say, I founded a coding group here in Jacksonville called She Can Code It. And we have a meeting Monday, 5:30, if you guys want to go. It's our kickoff for 2020. But when this opportunity came up, and I said, okay, Lord, is this something I need to do? And I felt like it did. It wasn't even so much about coding and technology. He just showed me the pictures of the young girls, right? And I said, oh, this girls, I don't know if you guys have a young girl, but they struggle. Boys I'm sure do too, but they struggle with their identity. They usually have no fathers in their homes. They're kind of defined, social media defines them. And I just felt like the Lord told me, make sure they come up, into who they need to be, find who they are, increase their confidence in a good way, make sure you teach them respect and empathy and, things like that. So in that group, I'm careful, okay? There's a lot of politics involved, especially with women's groups like that. So, there's other organizations that are politically motivated. They tend to go over the other side. There's the trans movement now where men can be women, and I told myself, I don't want that in this group. This is God's group. It's not mine. So, as Bill said, I put together core values. And your core values in your group dictate the culture of your group or your organization. So make sure you define your core values. And that's the only way you can get, because here's the thing, somebody asked me, so if a transgender woman, a Christian asked me, if a transgender woman comes into your coding group, would you let her in? Let him in, her. I said, of course. But as soon as this person violates my core values, I can technically kick them out. Because you've set the rules and the standard of your organization. So if you're a founder or leader or startup person, CEO, whatever it is, define your core values. Make sure it's clear, your principles, your mission, and your vision, and that kind of dictates, what you can and cannot do. So the voices you hear, you watch out for it. You'll see it in the news. You'll see it. There's probably diversity and inclusion movements in your company. Not that I'm saying it's wrong. They just get off. They just go down the wrong road somehow. In Avondale now we have, and nothing against Avondale has been great, but I don't see any of this stuff. But I think there's some rules now where you can have a bathroom where anyone can use it, that kind of thing. And some businesses are doing that too. So they do get off a little, and that's why HR, it's funny, Bill said evil HR. I pray for them, because they're subject to all these political things and, regulations that have to be met that are ungodly. But anyway, that was it. Sorry, probably went on and on. So does anyone have questions?
I want to say I know this woman, and she is a prayer warrior and a passionate woman of God. I have known her for a long time. Okay? I mean it. You already know that. I also, before we have questions, I felt prompted to share this story. 13 years ago, I made 2 trips to a nation called Zambia, which is in Central Africa. I think you may have been on that trip.
No, I went to Ghana with you.
Okay. In Zambia, anytime the Lord sends me to a nation, because of my calling, I look at certain demographics. So I want to know what's the average annual income, what's the lifespan, things like this. Now, we have a man who has a ministry to Zambia sitting here. And so I looked at the demographics prior to going. I went there to hold a marketplace leadership conference. The average lifespan of a Zambian 13 years ago was 39 years old. The average annual income was less than $400 a year. The nation had 12 million people, and 11.5% of that 12 million people were true street orphans. In other words, they lived on the street. As you drive down the streets, you would see 5- and 6-year-old kids with a sledgehammer breaking up little pieces of rock. And when I first went there, I held a meeting for a bunch of business leaders, and I sat at a round table just like this next to the recently retired president of the Bank of Zambia, whose annual income, he said, was $25,000 a year. Okay? And I noticed that when I was there, women, whenever a woman would talk to me, she would never look in my eyes. She would always bow down and bow her head like this and speak in a manner that I could barely, it was a whisper. And it really puzzled me. I mean, I'm talking executives. And I sat next to this president, and I asked him this question at the breakfast. I said, would you explain to me why are all the women, why do they never look me in the eye when they talk to me? Even, I'm talking members of the African Parliament from this nation. I said, why do they always stare down, and why do they whisper in such a way that I can barely hear them? And he put his chest out and he says, it's our traditions. When my wife addresses me at home and I am seated, she gets down on her knees next to my chair to address me. Okay? Average annual income less than $400 a year. There are many places on the earth that have issues like Sarah is talking about. I said to the president of the Bank of Zambia, because my wife accuses me of having a great sense of humor, I said, I am married to a real North American woman, just like Sarah. I said, I wonder if I could send her over here for a little Zambian sensitivity training. He did not see the humor. Okay, question and answers for Sarah.
How can women operate in a way to show their male superiors that they can add value to the company by working together with them to create, rather than just trying to get ahead by being feminists, joining the feminist movement? But how can we show that we're willing to work alongside them to create?
Very good question. Um, so women have to be careful sometimes. Unfortunately, not all men are godly. Sorry. In fact, there's ulterior motives sometimes, and especially beautiful women. You have to watch it because I've seen women use their sexuality to get ahead. So it's not all about the men, it's not against men. Women have issues, right? So when I said earlier, just do the right thing, women, I'm talking about building up your competence because when you have, for example, I have a group of architects now, and guess what? They're all men, 8 of them. I can't find a woman in the company I can promote. I have developers, senior developers, but they're not ready to be architects. I'm not going to promote them just because they're a woman. And so I told them, work on it, work hard, do the right thing. Watch even your body language, the clothes you wear, women. Sometimes you don't have to dress up like a man. That's not my point. Just be modest. Be modest because God loves purity. Right? He wants you to be pure, you know, be careful. And men battle these things. They turn on the TV, what do they see? It's all in the commercials, it's all in the shows, sexuality is everywhere. Young kids, they're targeting young kids now. You don't want to add to that. So to that point, just do your work hard, you know, and balance everything. One thing that amazes me is men work. Now that I'm in the leadership level, men work Saturdays, Sundays. I get emails Sundays. And the only reason I see the emails because now they all pop up in my phone and I have to block it. Just make it easy. But so be aware, watch, do the right thing, work hard. And like I said, eventually someone will see you. Someone will recognize it. Pray, right? You have the Lord. You have the Lord. I mean, even Jesus grew in favor before God and men. You have to grow in favor. It doesn't come naturally. Oh, I'm a child of God. Okay, I'm going to get my next increase, my promotion. You have to grow in favor. Just do the right thing. Okay.
So yeah, Matthew. So I mean, you obviously began saying, hey, listen, you know, fully admit that men and women often have different roles in life, like, and often they're wired differently, and you know, you kind of look at, I mean, I would say like men often like they're the providers, they're the father, the protectors. They like to destroy things a lot more than women do. Anyways, a little bit more aggressive, you know, and then women on one side, you know, obviously they're many different assignments and roles, but one of them is motherhood, and you know this warmth, these different things, and so kind of extrapolating from that, you would say, well, I just want to see your thoughts on it. But some professions are going to be more masculine in their intensity, like the army, you know, a fireman potentially, you know, things that require risk, where that's more naturally in the wiring of a man than you would say a woman, because you only wired one way often, right. And so you would say, hey, just because we see disparities doesn't mean that there's intrinsic bias going on all the time. Sure. It can often be an expression of the actual design of a man or a woman, but leaving in there that men have to be open to the fact that some women are like designed by God and called by God into these specific realms of authority. And when that happens, we need to ensure that our perspective is not limiting that. In some ways, this is kind of what you're saying. So you're not saying, hey, like, oh, we got this massive problem, but we're saying, hey, here's something to look at. I just want to, I don't know, I just want to see if that's kind of, because that's how I see it, but I want to see your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I agree. So I can only speak to technology, right? I'm sure. Yeah. So why are there more men in technology? Right, why is there? So, because that's how I started. I started studying these things. And I think there are cultural factors that come in. It's not a competence thing. I think women, if they study, or anyone, if you study harder, you'll probably get it. You know, things that come naturally to you, you don't have to study harder for it. Like some people are not good at math, but some are. right? I was a math major, and then I went to computer science. I tend to go for mathematical things before art, drawing, nothing wrong with those, but I tend to be in this side. And some people said that it may not, it doesn't seem, somebody told me, well, you're kind of different, Sarah. People tell me, you're kind of different. So I think there may be, I'm not saying all women can code, that's not my point. I'm just saying there are cultural barriers that we face that women who can code don't think they can because they're being told they can't. When IBM came out with the first desktops or PCs at home, who did they market to? The men. The boys, oh, you can play games. The women, they never even think about it. I'm a board member of Providence School as well. And I'm not knocking Providence, it's great. Hey, that's where my son goes. But the first problem I saw was my son takes a robotics class. And I said, are there any girls in your class? Like, no, Mom, we're all boys. So I went to the school, I said, so what about your advanced computer studies? It's like, all boys. 25 11th or 12th graders together, it's taking AP computer science. No girl. So I suddenly started looking, and I sat with the middle school principal, high school principal, the computer science teacher. The computer science teacher was, oh, I'm open to having girls in my classroom. So I looked at his classroom, and of course it's the, dark, it was all robots. And I said, well, first of all, girls would come in here and be totally, intimidated. And so I told him, you may just have to adjust things a little bit and see if you could probably attract more girls to it. And even one school, I heard they changed their computer science course, the name to the beauty of computing. Guess what? Half the girls applied. And it's the same course. They just changed the title. The beauty and joy of computing. So what I'm saying is, that's what I'm watching out for, is little things. There's biases that we don't even think about, that I think we should, but I do think there are certain roles that women cannot play and men cannot play.
Sarah, that's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, does anybody have one more question? Let's do one more question, guys. And then let's get one more. We're not going anywhere until we get one more. Rebecca.
It's not a paragraph.
Okay.
What do women bring to the table that men aren't naturally, maybe, that's not a God-given gift to men that women have?
Oh, very good. Okay, a couple things. Men tend to, and I'm not, and like I said, we try not to generalize, so there are exceptions, right? But men tend to climb ladders. Men tend to try and figure out, where am I in this hierarchy? Women are circlers. They bring people together. In my job, they're not under me, but part of my governance as an architecture group is to work with 25 to 30 teams. I bring them all together to make sure they're designing their software consistently. So there's a gift that I have of bringing people together and connecting them. Some men struggle with that because I've sat in a room with engineers. One time I was in Florida Blue working there, and 2 engineers almost got into a fist fight because they couldn't agree on an architectural pattern that they're supposed to adopt. And I'm sitting there like terrified. They're about to fight. And it's all about ego sometimes with them. Girls tend to be, yeah. It's all about ego sometimes. So I'm there like trying to calm them down, and sure enough, at the end, they were like, come on, let's go out and, have a beer. And it's over. Like, they're not fighting. Women tend to hold it for a long time, so which is also a gift. So I think there's that, bringing people together, creativity, not that I'm saying men are not, but most of the time, they bring beauty to things, right? It's just the way women are. So anyway.
Yeah, no, Sarah, amazing. Yes, really, really good stuff. So